battlefields in our minds. Thoughts are racing and intertwined. We've all got battlefields in our minds. Things we run from and leave behind. We've all
how you feeling? Okay. My name's Dave McLeod. I work with NCI FM Provincial Radio Network, Sirius XM Indigenous Music Countdown, and I also do a little bit of work with the National Music Centre in Calgary, recognizing Indigenous music across Canada. So that's in a nutshell what I do, and tonight we're here for a really important discussion. It's kind of pressing play on Indigenous music. What is it as a genre? Where do we sit in this country? What does the future look like? How is it part of our community? How does it connect to a wider community? So we have some incredible people here that are going to share some stories and some of their personal experiences. I got a little bit of housekeeping I was asked to share. We'd like to thank our funders. Let's give it up for Factor SoCan Foundation and the province of Manitoba for pulling us together. Thank you very much. Again, this is presented by Indigenous Music West program at Manitoba Music. Give it up for Manitoba Music. They're killing it. It's sponsored as well by SEMA, MORC, and Stingray. Give it up for them. I'm flying through this stuff. Okay, we're setting up we have some values we'd like to share here. We want everybody to feel welcome, comfortable. Please listen, be respectful, mindful of what's going on. Discrimination, bullying will not be tolerated. And if you feel uncomfortable, please talk to the Manitoba music staff. Put up your hand, Manitoba music staff, so people know where to go. So there we go. So right at the entranceway and also on this side. So you're covered on both sides. So keep that in mind. Okay. Tonight we're talking about sensitive topics. We have health practitioners as well here. Elders Patricia. Elder Patricia and Ovid Caribou. Can you put up your hands? So we have some people here. If you feel like you need to speak, please approach them as well. So thank you very much for being here. Miigwech. Okay, and the next note is we'd like to thank and honor our elders for being here, Barbara Nipanak and cousin Clarence Nipanak. Thank you, Kuzan. Doc Vesna and Marcella Vesna, thank you. Could you just, we want to recognize you. Nikki as well. Nikki, where you at? There you are. Nikki, we'd like to, Nikki Kumaksi Sutekasak. Close. Thank you very much. And Brandy as well for singing. And Marina as well. Yes, where is she at? Right here. Yes, thank you very much. That was beautiful. Thank you very much for being here. Let's give her a round of applause. You know, that whole introduction is really part of where we are at the Forks, because people have been gathering here for thousands of years. I was just in New Orleans last week, and they had 40 nations gathered where New Orleans is situated. 40 nations of Indigenous people, much the same as happens here in Winnipeg. The comparison could be made that a city was built with where Indigenous people gathered, and that's true of both cities. So we have that in common, and we're still gathering here. And I think we need to make note of that, recognize that. People connected to the land, people connected to the history, and we're here to share in a respectful, safe place tonight. So I want to say I want to recognize everybody here as well. I'm looking out, I'm seeing artists, industry people, I'm seeing people here who want to learn, people from the community who are here to support for the cause, people who are here for all good reasons. So thank you for taking time this evening to come out here. You're very important. It's important that everybody is here. And we're gonna be chatting for about an hour, and then we're gonna take about half an hour for everybody to for an opportunity for some questions to be asked, because it's important as well that everybody has a chance to as much as we can within the time we have to share here tonight. All right, so we are ready to introduce some of our speakers here. All right, let me do this. I'm excited about this. I better sit down. Okay, we're going to start with the gentleman to my right, and I've had the opportunity to meet. We met about a year ago almost.
Yeah.
Almost about a year ago. This is Curtis Running Rabbit-Lefthand. He's an Indigenous multimedia producer, musician, spoken word artist, and scholar. He is the founder and the executive artist director of Indigenous Resilience in Music, an Indigenous-led organization creating insight into the lives of Indigenous musicians and empowering Indigenous youth. He's also an artist and musician himself. He's a front person of an aggressive hardcore punk band, Signatory. Any punk fans here? There you go, Curtis. Curtis is also a proud member of the Blackfoot Confederacy and comes from the...
Siksigan, I'm Skapi Pikani.
There we go. Let's give it up. Stoney Nakoda Nation. Now, they had this recent thing called Calgary Top 40 Under 40 for 2019. Guess who's one of the recipients? This dude. He's making waves. No particular order, I'm going to introduce a friend of mine. I've known her for many, many years. Elaine Bomberry. She's Anishinaabe and Kiowa from Cayuga, from the Six Nations in the Grand River Territory, and that's located in southern Ontario, south of Toronto. She's worked as a freelance Indigenous arts for many years as an activist, a promoter, a manager, a TV producer. She's also makes her home right now. She's living out in Capilano Reserve, Squamish Territory in North Vancouver. Oh, that's not a bad place to be. She's also the manager of Juno Award-winning Mohawk blues piano man, the legendary Juno Award winner Murray Porter. Yes, Murray Porter. The man knows how to do it.
He's my husband too now.
Yes, full-time husband as well. Yeah, and actually you are the associate producer of his couple of his albums as well, including the one that won a Juno.
Yes.
Elaine helped create the best music category for Aboriginal Canada, recording category for the Junos back in 1994. She did that with Curtis Jaaji from here in Manitoba, and also the legendary Buffy St. Marie. So when the Junos recognize Indigenous artists, Elaine is part of that legacy. So you got to give it up for her for that. Couple other footnotes. Res Blues, it's on APTN, and the Aboriginal Music Experience is a radio documentary series. She was the writer, researcher, and the voice for those programs. We're really welcome to Treaty 1 territory here, Elaine. Thank you.
Honored. Thank you.
Now our next lady has come a long ways to be here this evening, and we're so thrilled you're here. Alethea. 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 We did do that earlier, didn't we? Alethea Beetson. She is an artist, producer who's worked exclusively with Indigenous communities across multiple art platforms to inspire new works responding to social issues, cultural heritage, and colonialism. Most recently, she worked as the Indigenous Engagement Coordinator at the Queensland Museum and was the curator of the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander program for the festival back in 2018 in Brisbane. Her research explores the function and ritual, resilience and resurgence in the creative development and production of Indigenous performance, all in one breath.
Yeah.
That's incredible. She's also currently the First Nations producer of BIGSOUND, the artistic director of Digi Youth, First Nations producer of Horizon Festival. So very connected to many, many genres of music and many, many artists. Let's give a round of applause for making her way here, all the way from Australia. And lastly, we have it's a duo, and it's twin flames. Wow. And it's Chelsey and Jaaji. And you wore that heck of a jacket coming in here. He said it was, what was it, a Bigfoot?
Yeti.
It was a Yeti?
Yeah.
You got to see this jacket of his later on. They're known for building bridges across cultures, continents, and styles. Twin Flames bring together a richness of personal history, musical experiences, multi-award-winning artists, including 2 CFMAs, Aboriginal Songwriters of the Year, and 3 NAMI winners. Their songs tell the story of courage and survival, honoring their ancestors' history and representing all 3 of their Indigenous backgrounds. They sing in English, Inuktitut, and French, and they're pushing boundaries within what is known as the contemporary folk genre. So we have the Indigenous genre pushing other genres. Their songs incorporate both Western and traditional instruments. So in terms of music, Twin Flames taking it where music hasn't gone in some categories. So thank you for both being here. Twin Flames. Just a little bit of background. How many people have heard of the National Indigenous Music Impact Survey that APTN did? Incredible. Just to give you a couple highlights where we're at. This was just released in November. It's a national study. What it found is there in total there are 620 industry insiders who completed on the online, and they found that some of the key findings indicate that Indigenous music contributed a total of $78 million to Canada's economy and supports 3,000 full-time positions across the country. So when we talk about an Indigenous industry, it exists, and it's being recognized, and thankfully APTN did an impact study, and it's one of the first giant steps in terms of recognizing Indigenous music playing a major role in this country. Now when we talk about what is an Indigenous music, I want to start out just by reading a quote from Brian Wright McLeod, who's a friend of mine. He wrote the Encyclopedia of Native Music, and he inspired me. I visited his place years ago, and I started collecting Indigenous vinyl after visiting him. Stevie Salas visited him as well. Anybody seen the movie, the documentary? It's called Rumble, The Indians Who Rocked the World. Yeah, great documentary. And Brian Wright McLeod inspired Stevie to get that project going. So here, it's important to share some words. And Elaine, I know you're good friends with Brian as well. So Brian says, Indigenous music, quote, "It is the music or the musicians, is it music or the musicians that make it native? I suppose it's fair to say that it's a bit of both. It's the music of the people who have known the land since time immemorial. But it also has been transformed along the way with the people and the land to become the hybrids of modern sounds we recognize today." So that's his take on what Indigenous music is. And I'm going to throw the first question to Elaine. In terms of, having the Junos recognizing Indigenous music, what was that like for that first step to say, hey, we have music in our community? What was that like for you?
Oh my, that was, it started out as a sense of frustration because I was invited to be a judge in what was then called, I can't even remember if it was called World or Global World Music. And when you're a judge for the Junos, you sign a you can't tell anyone you're a judge. And so it's not until the following cycle, award cycle, that I got invited to be on the committee. And so I'm sitting there in that meeting, and I said, our music doesn't fit here, it doesn't fit there. And at that time, that's when Cashton and Seventh Fire Band had both submitted to that category. And, they didn't get nominated or anything, but it just felt really frustrating that there was no place for Indigenous music because it was lumped in with all these other genres. And so I happened to be sitting with Daisy Fall at the time, who was the president of CARIS, Canadian Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences, and I'm sitting there, I'm going, music doesn't fit here, it doesn't fit there, and she leaned over and said, start a category then. And yeah, right. I just laughed, really, because I said, yeah, right, start a category at the Junos. And she says, come into my office after this meeting, and I'll talk to you and explain to you. So I just had to, she explained I needed to document 15 recordings in the previous year and in the coming year. And this is back in like 93, 92, 93. So it was just fax machines, right? So my little fax machine on the res was just pumping out letters from all these artists and saying, I'm going to be recording. So I was able to document 25 recordings in the previous year and 40 in the coming year. So I had that stack of faxes, And 2 days before the meeting, I get a phone call out of the blue from a woman named Buffy St. Marie, and I thought my friends were pulling my leg. Somebody's pretending to be Buffy, and it really was her. She says, I'm in town, and I hear you're doing this proposal to the CARIS Board of Directors in 2 days. Can I be of any help? And I went, of course. So went to go meet her at her hotel, both Shingoose and I, and showed her the amount of the documentation we had gathered of all the artists who said they were going to be recording. And she had written a beautiful essay on comparing what was going on with Native music at that time, because people were starting to get into the studios, comparing it to what was happening with Black music in the 30s and 40s when they were starting to record. And she said, we're a bit behind, but we're going to catch up. And so she says, let's talk strategy. I said, strategy or not, you're the first person to walk in that boardroom. I said, to me, that was strategy enough, She says, we'll just come along behind you, Buffy, flag our papers and everything. But it was really cool. We had 20 minutes, and they told us we got the category. Well, they kicked us out for 20 minutes. They debated it as a board, brought us back in, and said, okay, you got the category, now you can't say anything for 6 weeks. So that was a long 6 weeks. But till the Juno press conference. So that's basically in a quick nutshell how it all happened. And then, but that was the easy part, but the hard part became defining it. What was it? So that's why it was such a wide criteria for so long, because we wanted everybody to be in the category, contemporary and traditional musicians.
And some people ask that question, like, why recognize Indigenous music? Why can't it be just lumped in with other categories? Like, what is your response to that question? Because I've heard that question asked more than a few times.
Those categories are open, and Indigenous artists can decide where their music goes. No one's dictating to them, because you're Indigenous, you have to go in the Indigenous category. That's not true. It's up to the artists themselves where they're going to submit their music. It's not a checkbox where you say automatically you're going to be slotted into Indigenous. It's up to you as an artist.
And in this country, just historically, like it was illegal to use a hand drum until like 1950. So people forget that. Like, using a hand drum and singing a song, you can go to jail for that. That was Canada. And so there's been a long history where Indigenous people have not had their voice. Residential schools has been part of that. It also happened in many regions of our country. And so when you say catching up and getting there, it's incredible what's happened since that era to where we are today, where we have leading artists within our community. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to, Yeah, Jaaji, what are your thoughts on that when it comes to identifying or how do you define Indigenous music, that genre?
This is a two-edged sword for me. As an artist, I'm gonna chime in on what Elaine said. When we submitted our album to the last Junos before this one, when our album was eligible, we got a message back, and we were told that we should apply to the Indigenous because we had applied to the folk, and that's just obviously something that we felt strong in because we had back-to-back folk music awards in the Canadian Folk Music Awards, and then another one in the States. So we decided, okay, we're gonna apply to that one, and so we got a response back and saying that you should apply to the Indigenous category, and then at some point when they started filtering everything out, they told us that it's not Indigenous enough. I mean, I sing in an individual language, playing folk. So that for us was a bit bizarre. Obviously, they had choices to make, but I mean, with that particular album, 21 nominations, we felt it was a bit. It was a weird one. It was a weird one. But on the other token, it's obviously it's amazing to have this category in whatever capacity it is, whether it's a festival or whether it's on the radio station, because not enough Indigenous music gets played into, especially mainstream. And then the festivals, the whole one box, in the brown box we call it, where they will bring in an Indigenous artist to that festival. So there's that, and then on the other side, I often say, when I pick up my guitar doesn't say, oh, it's an Indigenous person that is picking up this guitar. So it for me, it's a mixed feeling, right? Music is music. It doesn't matter what language you're singing in. It doesn't matter what culture you're singing in. It all touches us in a different way. I mean, my favorite music is African folk music. I don't understand it, but I love it. So that's my chime.
Chelsey, what are your thoughts on that, on defining the genre of Indigenous music?
I think it's one of those things. Is this on? Yeah. Maybe I'll just hold it. So it's very hard to say what Indigenous music is. We're all individual people, and we all have individual things that have influenced our lives, our upbringing, and that influences our music. And I just wanted to chime in a little bit too. Like, think of 1993. I mean, we're 2020. In 1993, thank God that people stood up and said, let's have a Juno category for Indigenous artists, because if not, no one would have ever listened, And I think 93 is a lot different than 2020, where we see a lot of artists now really at the front line saying, why are we all in one category? Well, at least we had a category, and I think that's, like Jaaji said, the two-edged sword. What is Indigenous music? What does it mean to be an Indigenous person? We've been told to our face after playing a set, you guys are actually good. And that for us was a compliment, but also really sad, thinking, what, Indigenous artists are not good? Other Indigenous acts are not good? And this one person said, full disclosure, I'm forced to book Indigenous acts often. Does this thing work? One of them won? All right, it's trying. I'm forced to book Indigenous acts, and sometimes we have to sit through the showcasing, and I feel like I need to block my ears. And I thought, how sad is that an industry would look at Indigenous artists as just that box that they have to fill, rather than something they want to enjoy and be open to and listen to. And so I think, all along the talent has been there, just people haven't taken the time to listen. And I think we are 5 years into this career. We're still very new. We've been extremely fortunate with how our career has gone, but we've worked really, really hard too. But to see the artists that are coming out, like the numbers that are coming out, Indigenous artists, and they're talented. You know, they're no longer just the box. And so we saw that just recently with the Juno Awards that were announced yesterday, is yes, the Indigenous category is still there, which is amazing because it gives artists a shot in a super huge ocean full of big fish, right? But a lot of artists were also nominated in non-Indigenous categories. And this was the first year that I think we've seen that number. So for me, there's definitely a progress. And I think that Indigenous music is just the artists that choose to represent themselves and who they come from and being proud of that.
Thank you. Alethea, what are your thoughts in defining that genre of Indigenous music?
Well, I think firstly, I'm a guest here, so thank you so much for having me on your lands in Treaty 1 territory. It's interesting to say that. We're only just on a path to treaty in my country, to give some context to so-called Australia. And I also probably have to define what indigeneity kind of looks like in an Australian context. With saying that, this is probably just the government sat around in a room once going, what do we call them? So like, it's semantics in many cases, but there's obviously Indigenous people of Australia, in which there are two major, again, panned groups, and that is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. So, Aboriginal people are of the mainland of Australia, which is probably what you're used to seeing on a map of Australia, and Torres Strait Islanders, they come from a group of islands that are on the top of Queensland, and they are two separate, again, pan-Indigenous groups. The people that I come from are the Cubby Cubby and Wiradjuri people, and we are on the mainland, which is Aboriginal Australia. I guess in terms of best practice, for want of a better way of looking at it, it would be Cubby Cubby and Wiradjuri would be how I would talk about my indigeneity. However, that doesn't really work in the context of a music industry having an award for each of those things. Our major music awards don't have an Indigenous category. They did at one point, but that was well kind of before my time. Where I work at Q Music, which is the province or state Queensland, there is the Queensland Music Awards, and there is an Indigenous award at that, which again seems to carry the same sentiments that I've heard already around. Obviously, it's incredibly important that there is a category like this so that Indigenous people are recognised, particularly because of the barriers that they're facing within the industry, and also then the same sentiment around there needs to be more integration within the mainstream. I've only come into music in the last 2-3 years, having worked in another arts industry, so I've come in at a time, thanks to a lot of hard work of Indigenous people before me, where I don't think Indigenous music has ever been seen as a genre. In my time working in music. That's not to say that that's not what the rest of the industry thinks. It's just that the Indigenous people leading me in my space, it's been Indigenous people have been making music. And I suppose there is a separation between obviously traditional and ceremony. That's not part of this discussion, and I can't speak to that. I'm probably more talking about the contemporary music world, which still has problems with the semantics because one put something in the past in our country. So it's always been about Indigenous musicians have been making music across different genres and recognising them for that. And I think we're starting to get, thanks to the work of people who've gone before us. We just had Thelma Plum was the highest placing Indigenous person in the Triple J Hottest 100 countdown. She got number 9, which hadn't happened yet. And she said in an interview, I hope I don't hold that record for very long.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for noting that too. Like we do have different genres of Indigenous music, and some don't play a role at all with award shows. You know, and you look at we should mention traditional music like powwow. Like there's touring powwow groups that have followings, that have fans that stand on the sidelines and record the songs, and learn those songs, and then copy them and learn to sing them. So that's just one small example, but there are many different genres. So I think this evening we are talking more of a commercial kind of tone, right? Because traditionally, we all think of music, we think songs on the radio 3.5 minutes long, 4 minutes long, we're not looking at traditional music like flute. We're not looking at all the other genres. So our discussion is mainly about the commercial sound this evening. We need a whole lot more time if we went into every genre. But respectively, we need to recognize traditional music plays such an important role in ceremony as well. And our next speaker here, Curtis, is an interesting, because you're an artist, Curtis, who connects to culture deeply, and you're doing punk, and you're also working with up and coming artists. So I think the question about defining Indigenous genre of music is important to hear from you too.
Thank you. Okay, nistuan ko kamakatak sa ken motto to sa gesa tapiwa. Kaya sukapi max kay natix kumaman. I come from the Blackfoot community. And my name is Running Shadow, and my name is a direct relation to Running Rabbit, whose signature is on the Treaty 7 document that exists today. He's my great-great-great-grandfather. So what I did was just an quick introduction of who I am and where I come from, and saying thank you for bringing me here, and to all the organizers for bringing me here and welcoming me into this territory. It's really important for Blackfoot people to do that. And usually, now going to the cultural side of it, is we'd also sing a song. As we sing a song to identify who we are and where you come from, and especially if you come from a society. And also you have a song that comes with your name so that people know who you are and when you're coming into that community. So for me, when I think about it from a Blackfoot perspective, about what Indigenous genre or what Indigenous awards, what those look like, it's kind of interesting because I come from it where I was, in some ways, privileged to grow up in my community. I can speak fluent in Blackfoot and Sipawaksin, which is my first language. And so when I come into this, I kind of come from that. When I was born, I had people from my family and my clan, which is the Biters Band clan, welcome me into existence through a song. So when you're born as a Blackfoot person, a Nisitapi person, a Siksikaisitapi person, you're always welcomed in with your name, but that name has to come with a song, and before you're gifted that name, the song has to be sung first, and then you exist, because then Creator has to also identify who you are by that name. And so when I think about all of these things, and I think about all these like Indigenous, awards and stuff like that, now fast forwarding from that time being a kid and getting all these songs gifted to me, and what we call them is boomaks and transfer rights. And so transfer rights is how we identify who we are and we grow up and we learn, and that's our educational system. And when we come into knowing that we always have songs that come with that. So when I come in, I hear Indigenous genre and I hear an Indigenous award, I always think about, well, for me, sometimes it's kind of the opposite end too, where do I identify as being Siksikaisitapi or Pikani or Siksiga first, and then say I'm Indigenous, or do I say I'm Indigenous at all? And so those are the things that I always run into a lot. And at the same time, it makes it more difficult because I'm always working with other types of talent out there, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, always, thinking about how I can better represent them, and doing that through my organization. So through IRIM, Indigenous Resilience in Music, our whole mandate is to break down that barrier, to not have an Indigenous stage at a folk festival or at another festival in the corner. And then bringing that together where we compare these artists based sometimes on genre, not an Indigenous genre, but based on the relativity between those two artists to play the same stage, because that's a part of building that relationship. And for me and my culture, that's what I was taught growing up. And so when I come to think about ceremony, when I come to think about that mixed in with being music industry words, a talent buyer or a representative, or being a part of the industry, talking to other artists, and also even sometimes managing them, I always think about, well, do we have to say, because sometimes they're not even Indigenous too. Like for me, I work with a lot of hardcore punk bands. I partially managed for a little bit this band called Trench from Alberta, and it's one of my these guys, I grew up with them in hardcore and that's where I started off in the music industry, is in hardcore. So I was in the the hard end of it of sleeping on floors and trying to get gas money to make it to the next venue to perform. And that was like that's what I knew in the industry growing up, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that here too. But like with that in that band, the guitarist is Indigenous. He's Cree, and I was actually going to apply for them to be apply into the Junos and put them in and get that check mark of Indigenous award or music award of the year, or I can't remember which one it is. I don't know what it's named now, but putting them in there and talking to them and going through this, it was kind of, they don't want to do it. So it's really hard to kind of think about representation, and especially representing bands, because I come from that cultural aspect first. And then when I think about the Indigenous genre, it sometimes doesn't relate to me. And my whole view and within my work in the industry is to essentially, and I don't mean to be blunt about it, but eliminate that and just make it a collective like music industry thing where Indigenous people can always identify as being Indigenous, but they can still perform in the same spaces as other artists and not be put in that corner.
So, today there was a lot of some media attention towards the genre of Indigenous music through the Winnipeg Free Press and CBC, and there's a curiosity of the whole genre of Indigenous music. And when you stop and you think about like where we are and where we're going, Elaine, where do you think things are going right now? Like in terms of our scene, like we talked about the Junos. We also have the Indigenous Music Awards as well, an award show. And then recently there was another music award show announced, Summer Solstice Indigenous Music Awards taking place in Ottawa in June. So there's a new award show as well. I'm going to go. Why are award shows within our own community? How do they play a role in recognizing the genre?
I think that, which one's working? Is this working? I don't think this is working. Yeah, this is all about sound. Hello? Hello? Are we going? Okay.
Just gotta hold it closer.
Well, I think the fact that we have a new Indigenous Music Awards is a good thing. And the more chances we have to celebrate our artists, why not? Our traditional drum groups, they compete at powwows, some powwows, not all. But why not give them as much opportunity as possible, especially for the next generation to see that, if I'm playing my guitar, or whatever instrument in their bedroom, that they have something that they can look forward to and make a mark with their music. Why not? So, with that being said, the Summer Solstice Indigenous Music Awards will be on June 18th at the National Arts Centre in Ottawa. I never would have thought I'd see the day that this would happen. And it comes out of a festival, the Summer Solstice Festival, that Trina Mather-Samard has been producing for quite a number of years. And Vince Fontaine over there, I know, has been working hard on it. And I'll just be helping out as well, starting this week. So the submission deadline is open. Nominations are open February 1st, closing March 31st to all you musicians in the house. And the categories are very interesting, and there's postcards there on the door, right at the door there, if you want to grab one before you leave, so you can become a bit more familiar with them. So yeah. I say, let's celebrate them all.
So yes, let's give it a round of applause. So we have, so there's 2 award shows going on. There's National Indigenous Day. There's a Juno category. There might be somebody here going, well, sounds to me like everything's fine. And is it fine? Is it enough? Where do we stand in terms of Indigenous music being recognized throughout the whole country? And it's an open question for anybody too. Whoever would like to make a comment on that.
Well, this one's still too quiet. It's okay. I'll just try and check it myself. Which one is this one? Check 1 2 1 2 1 2. It's 2 of them. Well, 2 of them? All right.
That sounds better.
That's better.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. One thing as a musician I can't stand is when sound doesn't go the way we want. No offense to you at all. It's just sometimes tricky. Plus, I'm a bit OCD, but that's fine. So, can you rephrase the question?
Yeah, just I mean, I've heard this before. Like, a person told me this. It's like, well, you guys have the award shows. You have the category. You have those other music shows. So, what else do you need? Isn't that enough?
I think it's a great start. But I know for us, my exterior lets me live a white privileged life, right? But I choose to live my life as an Indigenous woman because that's my family, that's my heritage. But I think we have still a long way to go. The Indigenous platforms, Indigenous awards help the smaller musicians that are just coming out get that media and that press that costs so much money to get their names out there and gets them started so that they can have recognition from the bigger award platforms. When we visited Australia, we were privileged to speak with Aboriginal people over there, our brothers and sisters. And I was just saying that to Alethea earlier today. I feel that as an Indigenous Canadian, we're very lucky. When I heard of all the things that they don't have yet in Australia, sometimes being in this country, born in this country, there are a lot of things that are still wrong for our Indigenous people in this country. I can't get started on that. There's a lot of progress still to be done. But I think all the things that are going on are really, really hopeful for what the future will hold. I know for myself, as an artist, as a woman, an Indigenous woman, I just want to be seen as a musician for the talent that I bring to the table and not be asked if I can wear a costume when I perform. And that has happened. You don't look Indigenous enough. Can you wear a costume? Not even regalia, a costume. And the fact that we still get emails and still get requests like that, I think shows that there's still a lot of work to be done in the industry, a lot of work to be done with the organizations that are wanting to hire us, not just checking off those boxes. So it's, again, a two-way street. We are lucky, but I think there's still a ton of work that can be done. And just being seen as equals amongst other musicians would be a huge place to start.
Awesome. Curtis, you were going to make a move there too.
Yeah, I just kind of going back to what I was saying before is at the same time, even though I say that, like, I am very thankful that we've had people break down those barriers for us to have that opportunity in the music industry. And I'm super thankful for, those chances that we never would have had and have like Buffy Sainte-Marie and folks like you who did that work. But I also think we're coming to a time where the changes are happening and a lot of youth, especially a lot of Indigenous youth musicians, are starting to take the steps forward with the same intent of where it was before, but now realizing we can move and continue to move and progress. And now how do we progress? And that's why this question is a question: why is Indigenous a genre? And for me, again, like I'm a younger person who has like 10 plus years under my belt in the music industry, working again, coming from the hardcore punk scene. And I actually have worked with hardcore punk musicians who are Indigenous, but have never said they're Indigenous, and now they're getting, Grammy Awards and they're for their category in like heavy music. And they just never said it. They never said, but now they and you see them, they still promote it. They talk about their indigeneity. Some of them can speak fluent in their language, and they're just in this hardcore punk band, and they just see that their culture is still there with them, and they're still interacting with it and interchanging and sharing culture with other people as they go along in the music industry. So I think it's possible to start the progress forward from those who have done such hard work, and with our generation now move it into a direction that I feel a lot of our ancestors would be so thankful for.
I think as when you decide to become an artist, I think you can all relate to the fact that maybe it was because our upbringing was not as easy, where validation came a little bit harder. So you become a musician wanting to be validated, and especially as an Indigenous person. So when you become an artist and you get validated for your work, it definitely feels good, right? When somebody from industry states that it's not about the awards, it's not about the nominations, that's caribou poop right there. People that are presenting, people that have these festivals like seeing hardware, because it shows that the person is dedicated to whatever they are doing, especially if they're independent artists. I mean, we're independent artists, and we've been very careful on who we bring in. And so it has been extra hard work for us. So when we get that mantle starting to fill up above our fireplace, we like that. It is what it is, especially as an Indigenous artist. So, yeah.
You know, it's the term, I know Jeremy Dutcher, I think it was like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, he mentioned the word renaissance. There's Indigenous renaissance going on right now in terms of music. Some people feel that is true. Some people feel like, you know, we have to remember those who came before. A lot, like Shingus as an artist, as we mentioned earlier. And over the last like 15 years, I've really noticed the Indigenous music has come a long ways in terms of like mixing anything goes. It used to be more country based, I'd say about 20 years ago, and now it's turned into anything goes. And the internet's played such a huge role with that. I mean, I've been to Kuujjuaq, northern Quebec, and I've talked to an artist who's playing guitar, and he said, I learned from YouTube. So he learned how to play guitar. He said, I didn't have, nobody in the community was playing metal the way I want to play, and I learned how to watch YouTube. So things are moving really quickly in terms of any genre goes right now. And I guess the importance of music in our community, we should touch upon that before we get to asking people questions. But maybe we'll just go through each of you. Like we've talked about the award shows a bit, but let's talk about community. Elaine?
Yeah, I wanted to say it's much more than award shows, that's for sure. It's about building that infrastructure to support our Indigenous musicians. And you're so lucky here in Manitoba. You have that Indigenous Music Development Office. I see Jade Harper, Shanine Robinson, and Alan Grayles over there who really put Manitoba Indigenous music on the map.
Give it up.
Worked his ass off. Yes. True warrior. And I look around the room, I see a number of other people as well. Kim Wheeler there worked in publicity. So it's about creating those infrastructures to support the artists. In Toronto years and years ago when we had a lovely NDP government, we had this, we called it the Sunny Ray Days, when we had the Aboriginal Music Project come out of Toronto. We had magazines, we had dance offices, and then once the new government came in, all of that got slashed. But now everyone's rebuilding their own organization. So I'm seeing that right across the board in all performing arts, in all those areas, people forming their own dance companies. Now Alan has his own agency, and 2 of his artists got nominated yesterday for Junos. It's so amazing. So it's about creating that support, and I just want to take it one step further as well. It's like we can't always be reliant on the government for money for our artists to create projects of their own. That impact study that APTN did, I hope we get some mileage out of that as well for our artists, and to convince our own Indigenous business people they need to invest in our own artists. My husband's CD, we tried to get factor money, we tried to get money, we got turned down everywhere we turned, even though he had a Juno Award. We were able to convince 3 businesses in our own community to invest, and they did. So you'll see his album, there's no government stamp on it. No funding whatsoever. So it's like, I feel that's got to be the next step. Share that study with our business people and convince them we got a lot of millionaire business people in our community. Come on, give it back. So I think we start knocking on those doors and let's make it happen. Let's shake it down.
Elaine said shake it down. Yeah. Yay.
Communities are definitely, without communities, we wouldn't be where we are. True story. Coming from a population of 250 people, where I come from, you know, throwing my songs on the internet, SoundCloud at the time, to all of a sudden being invited to stages in a span of, I don't know, 2 months, and then all of a sudden, this is our living, this is our full-time living. If it wasn't for our Inuhatika, Nakokmeek, and then our indigenous families, you know, I am Inuit, but I'm also Mohawk. So if it wasn't for those communities, we wouldn't be where we are. You know, and that's one of the things that we, and especially with our youth, we try to encourage our youth that are going into music. Go into music for the right reasons. I'm sober. I wasn't in the beginning. The Drunken Indian is something that has always been thrown around forever. And as an artist, it's something obviously right away. They think that we're gonna drink and take drugs. And that's the truth. But as a sober artist, wanting to make a better community, because our music is something that we take pride in, wanting to help our people. So when we are up there, you know, we tell them, go into music for the right reasons. And that's what a community is about. And one of the other things that I did want to mention as well that we haven't talked about was the Indigenous Music Countdown. That in itself is a community. And thank you so much for that, Dave.
Thank you. We have to mention Jeff Leakes here from Sirius XM. Channel 165 is committed to Indigenous music. Let's give it up for Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
I guess I can kind of say the same as Jaaji. When we started out in music, we met on a television show that was called Talents Autochtones Musicaux, so Aboriginal music talent, and it was being filmed out of Quebec City. And you know, that's really what got my career started in music. I was just a single mom with 2 kids that had this dream of making an album to show my kids it's never too late. And it never is too late for anybody, you know. And I think the first summer that I gave up my government job, Jaaji said, "Come with me to the Arctic. Let's tour the Arctic." And I said, "You know what? Let's do it." So we went up, and you know, being visibly white, I, for the first time in my life, encountered what it felt like to be the odd one out. But the sense of love and that sense of community. And at first, they didn't want me up there. You know, they wanted their Inuk man artist singing in Inuktitut language. And I understood that sense of pride in who he was and what he was doing. And I supported it 100%. But he fought for me every single time. And he said, just give her a chance. Give her a chance to be up there with me and you'll see. And so we did. Community after community, school after school, show after show. And we kept coming back. Because one of the things with our communities is they're used to being abandoned. They're used to being someone's pet project where someone goes in and tries to save everybody and make a difference and leaves. You know, and the youth especially are heavily impacted by that. So we didn't want to be that artist, those artists that just go in and profit off of the people and leave. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you. It's the second time you've mentioned, like, you know, in terms of looking white, but you're Métis.
I am.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And can you share a little bit about that in terms of the Métis identity and what that's brought to your career in music?
Yeah, I think, you know, just being who I am and embracing that has been a journey in itself. Especially with music. Like in 2015, both Jaaji and I were nominated at the Indigenous Music Awards here in Winnipeg. And when we showed up, everyone just assumed I was his white girlfriend. But I was actually nominated in my own category. You know, and I think that's always been something that, I guess some days it's heavy when you have to constantly justify who you are and have people visibly look at you and just say, how are you Indigenous? You know, and it's like, I would never ask somebody, how are they something? So I think it's been a journey in which I talk about how difficult it's been for me at times. But I've noticed that in all our communities, even outside our communities, when we start to open up as human beings and we talk about our struggles and the things that we've been through, there's that ability to connect with people on a completely human level. And I've had so many people that have come up after shows, you know, when I'll talk about one of our songs called Plain Song, being proud of who you are and where you come from, no matter where that is. And just my journey of being Métis, my journey of not being allowed to grow up with my culture because of the shame that my family felt and because of the fear they had of not being able to get a job and make money like everyone else. And so I didn't get to grow up with it. So I think for me, it's something that I longed for my entire life, something that was rightfully mine. And so by sharing that story, there have been so many other Métis people that look visibly white, that come up after shows, that write us music, and that thank us for that. So we do have the Métis community that supports us. We have the Inuit community that supports us. We have our First Nation brothers and sisters that support us, all because in one way or another, we're sharing the same stories.
Let's give it up for Chelsey.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, it's interesting because over the years I've met some artists that they get mainstream success. They come from the community level, then they get mainstream success. And as everybody knows, when you're on the charts, eventually you're not on the charts. And eventually you're back where you started. You're with community at some level. And I've had one artist, she shared with me that you can't forget where you come from. Because that's home, that's where you go back to. Alethea, I just want to get your thoughts on what's been shared here.
Well, in terms of community, I suppose I probably, since we're sitting beside each other, the Australian context around, I guess, Indigenous people that look like me is a little bit, I guess, different, as you and I discussed when you came to my country. Because I'm the literal product of what they wanted in the assimilation policy, it's just we belong to our Indigenous groups. And I don't have an experience. I have an experience of being able to walk down the street, obviously, and experiencing a whole bunch of privilege, but whilst growing up in an Indigenous family that did not have that privilege. But I also have a last name that's synonymous with being Indigenous in my country, because my uncle was a really well-known football player or rugby league player or your equivalent of gridiron, but kind of not really. And so I've just kind of grown up with a very different lived experience, which means that my community have been really great to me, but I need to be great for them. It's a two-way street. I feel I'm very responsible to them, and my community is where I'm ancestrally connected to, where I live and work, and also the wider music community as well, and the arts community. And what I'm kind of getting a sense of, having been in, well, the fact that I'm in another country and I look around and see so many familiar faces, is that there is, as we know from where we've just been in the International Indigenous Music Summit, there is a global Indigenous community that is growing stronger and stronger. And the way we feel kind of back home about that is, you know, Australia doesn't exist. It's really just our many sovereign nations. And we're more interested in connecting with Indigenous people from these lands and creating our own touring pathways and creating our own industry together, because it hasn't worked for us back home in the mainstream. So we're kind of more interested in collaborating with all of you and becoming stronger that way. And as someone who runs an Indigenous youth arts organisation, the representation of Indigenous musicians has increased with YouTube and social media. They see my young people back home not only see Indigenous musicians from home, but they see Indigenous musicians from these lands as also people they can look up to. And so that increases our representation, and I think there's great strength there.
Nice, thank you for sharing that. That's, you know, it's interesting. When I was in, I had the privilege of going to the New Orleans conference. And it was, you meet people with different cultural backgrounds. Like we define Indigenous typically as First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. But there are other, like here I've met 4 couples where it's a Filipino partner and a First Nations partner. So there's other indigeneity from the culture. It's not what people think is like, I think this is an Indigenous person in my head. Like we kind of have to unlearn that, because there are Indigenous people of many nations that are everywhere, and it's happening here in our city. It's happening globally. I mean, I was told the Creole people that went down to New Orleans, a lot of them were Métis, and they had Anishinaabe histories, and they moved down there to form that place. So we're in a melting pot right now. Indigenous music and Indigenous is just going to keep growing. I think it's going to go places we don't even know right now. It's going to be awesome where it goes. So I'm just going to throw it back to you, Curtis. Talk about community, because I know you're really involved community grassroots.
So is anyone else here that went to the Indigenous Music Summit in New Orleans? Oh, switch. Hello. Oh, okay.
I think holding the mic actually makes a difference.
Am I too loud? Was there anyone else here that went to the Indigenous Music Summit? I know Jade, everyone else, these folks. We were doing community-based workshops in Treaty 7, so in Siksika, Piikani, Stony Dakota, working with different nations and just like empowering them to reclaim their identity in music and showing them the steps of how they can do it from their own grassroots reclamation of their culture and reclaiming their culture and showing them what to do and how to start that. And for us, it was kind of difficult because it was, coming from a Blackfoot perspective and different other perspectives in our organization and our staff. We had to just come with basic tools to help them. And then from that, fast forward to, we started doing showcases. And it's really crazy because when we did our first showcase as an organization, I had been promoting shows way back before IRIM started, and then going into this and doing a showcase where we mixed an Indigenous lineup with a non-Indigenous lineup, but we had the headliner being Indigenous. And I'm sure everyone knows here who DJ Cookham is. Yeah. Amazing DJ. And we had her headline our first showcase. We were partnered with some other friends, actually a cousin of mine too. He runs a company out in Siksika, or out in Calgary, in Mohkinstsis. And we did that show, and then so many Indigenous people came out to the show. A majority of them knew who DJ Cookham was. A lot of them didn't. And it was the first time I saw anything like that at a show and festivals and showcases ever. And I just went up to them, to some people like, oh, hey, like, do you know who this artist is? And they're like, no. And I was like, oh, cool. Well, why would you come here for any other artists? And like, no, we just came here to support you. And some of them were my cousins. They're like, I came here to support you because you're my family. And they're like, and they didn't know who the artists were. They weren't even into the music, and they're just there to support and build a community. That feeling and feeling that comfort that we create a space for these Indigenous people to come and see these Indigenous and non-Indigenous acts perform together and create that community was empowering. But then when I went to, and then so now doing many showcases and continuing to promote and everything like that and run our programs, our youth programs, our artist residencies, and now we have a festival in Calgary as well too. That fast forwarding to the Indigenous Music Summit, I felt that again. Like igniting that fire again, that I don't say it was like really unlit, but I felt that community aspect where in a space where we wouldn't necessarily have that.
And just so everybody knows, there's about 44 Indigenous acts from all different countries at the gathering.
And everyone, even though they had different beliefs, different practices, cultural practices, they were able to share their opinions, even if they disagreed or they agreed. They were able to share that, hey, you know what? We come from different cultures, we come from different backgrounds, we are Indigenous, we are musicians, and this is who we are, and we got that space to share that. I've never really had that space before, and that is so important to me as a Blackfoot person working in the music industry, because I don't get that community a lot within our organization, within going to showcases and other festivals, helping consult festivals on how they represent Indigenous musicians to perform on their stages and everything like that. Like, you never get that. And so for me as a Blackfoot person, community is everything, into songs, into how we educate ourselves, and even how we can have songs, again, going back to transfers and songs, how those are gifted to you and given to you, as you grow older, it needs the community because it's a cycle. It goes through the community before it gets to you. And then you get the gift of having that song and that transfer to go and share that cultural perspective with someone below you, or not below you, but someone coming up after you who's also from your community or your society. And so I felt that when I go to ceremonies in Siksika, I felt that same thing at the Indigenous Music Summit. It was powerful. So I think that is something that, again, whether we disagree or agree on things, as an Indigenous community, as Indigenous people, that community aspect is something that a lot of people in the music industry do not have. And we need to be thankful for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Curtis. Yeah, there was a moment at the gathering where there was a place set for a person who couldn't be at the conference, and the person that couldn't be at that conference was defined as somebody being incarcerated. It was defined as somebody who might have passed and might be an ancestor. It could be a young person who just couldn't be there, that was being prayed for, that to someday be there. And that's the difference. Like, how many music conferences does that happen at, where there's a seat given? And during the whole conference, there was tobacco on a chair for that person that couldn't be there. And that speaks to exactly what you're talking about, Curtis. It's just that recognition being so important. The opportunity, like I know some of you are music leaders, industry people, that inclusion is so important, and recognizing Indigenous artists, great Indigenous artists. I know we have Chris Frere here from the Winnipeg Folk Festival, and William Prince. I was at the Folk Festival when William Prince was on the main stage. He went out there and it was magical. Thousands of people were so moved, and that was before a lot of the awards or a lot of the recognition took place. And you felt the energy. You knew something shifted with his career. I talked to him afterwards, and he felt it, like he really did. It was magical. So it's recognizing talent within our communities for what it is, damn good talent. And so that opportunity should be there, and rather than saying, a lot of artists, like you said, you want to be recognized as great artists, not as Indigenous artists, but as great artists. So it's having that opportunity to happen is so important for our community. We've reached that point where we don't have a lot of time left, but we are going to open it up to questions. So if anybody has a question, please, this is the time. Jason.
Sure. I'm not going to ask a question, but I'm just going to say that I do support the Juno Awards. I do support the Aboriginal category. I do think there needs to be another category as well. I think there needs to be two Indigenous categories, at least one for traditional piece and one that acknowledges the other artists that are a bit different. I don't think we can forget about the people who experienced residential school, the kids who are in care, and those kids on the res that get out of there and create music about those stories. I don't think we can forget about them.
And those of you who think residential school is historic, Jason attended residential school.
And I don't think those stories can ever be forgotten. I think we need to tell those stories, and it doesn't always come through with a hand and a drum. It also comes through a guitar. It comes through comes through dance, and these are things that we can't forget. So I think there's value in Aboriginal artists, Indigenous artists, whatever genre that is, and it needs to be told. My dream is that in every province we have the nations there celebrated in Canada, all across Canada, up in the territories, down everywhere, and nationally as well. Like, I want to see Canada embrace the Indigenous people and the culture and celebrate it nationally. That's what I want.
You got my vote. Give it up. Thank you, Jason. More questions? Come to the sideline, and if you'd like to ask a question, you'll be heard. Shout it out if you want. Kim Wheeler's on her way.
So, like Jason, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say I'm sitting back there and I'm kind of whispering to Sandra my commentary, and our artists, right? They have to be like a lot of Indigenous people, twice as good to be considered half as good. So a lot of our artists don't get signed to labels. They don't have label support. They're doing it independently. They're writing their own songs. They're playing their own music. They're helping each other record. And that's really incredible, and it speaks to the breadth of their talent. And I think that the non-Indigenous people in this room need to hear that.
You bring up a good point, Kim, because you see a lot of building, a lot of connections, a lot of collaborations that's happening in the community, widespread, and people are being lifted up, definitely. So yeah.
Yeah, and Elaine mentioned that I do publicity as well, right? So we have to work together as like the bigger community to help lift each other up, and we are really seeing the industry being built in our time, right?
And that's a really good point too. Yeah, our industry, like recognizing the music's important, but building within is probably what's most important. Like Alan Grey Eyes is taking community music to neighborhoods. So when he does his Sakaway Festival. I knew I'd say it wrong. Yeah, but when he does this festival, he takes music to communities where people can't afford to go to shows. So he's getting music to the community, and little kids are seeing Indigenous musicians and being inspired, and knowing that that music exists is so, so important. Okay, any more comments? We're looking at comments, it seems.
Thanks, Dave. My name is Danielle. I live here in Winnipeg, and I'm going to be getting my call to the bar in June. And yes, thank you. I was chatting with a law firm about the prospect of entertainment law here in Winnipeg, and they said there's no industry for it. But then I come to a place like this and I see so many like amazing Indigenous artists. So my question is, because there is a question, is do you need a lawyer?
100%.
But also, like, how do these different fields support one another? Because I see so much opportunity for collaboration and community building.
I think for us personally, it's been a game of just nonstop researching who we can have help us, and finding the people that understand where we come from, but also what we're trying to do, and not just about the dollar signs, because Indigenous is in right now, right? And there's a lot of sharks out there that see that. And so for us, the first member that we added to our team was an entertainment lawyer. And he has been key in everything that we've done, because the reality is, it's Buffy St. Marie that said this in a round circle that we had with her a while ago. But she said, none of us got to grow up around tables where lawyers were talking or doctors were talking, and where we were exposed to all these things that a lot of other families are exposed to. So how are we supposed to know any of that stuff? And especially when most people won't help us. Like Kim said, most of us are all independent. There's the odd few that get the major labels, but have they had an entertainment lawyer actually look at that stuff before they've signed it? We see a lot of people that are everywhere, but we know they're not paying their bills. So I think our thing, yes, entertainment lawyers are super, super needed. We're from Ottawa. We're based in Ottawa, which is not really seen as a musical city. But our entertainment lawyer is based in Ottawa, and he is the busiest guy around, right? And I think it's just so important to know what you're signing and what you're getting into as any artist, but especially as an Indigenous artist, because we didn't get to grow up with that knowledge.
Thank you, Danielle.
One of the, this is a story for those of you that are Indigenous musicians. We had a folk, we call him the folk legend. He's no longer with us today. And a part of that reason was because of exactly that, not being properly represented. Here he was singing his songs, and they're still being sung today. They're on the radio. His name was Charlie Adams, and he was from Kuujjuaq. And his songs became so popular that somebody took advantage of that. Not even somebody from the music industry. Somebody that decided to use Inuit funds to build the studio. And fast forward to that, his songs are untouchable. The guy owned everything. The guy owned everything. The guy that made the studio, using funds that Inuit people are giving or paying taxes to build infrastructure. He ended up on the street, heartbroken. And that's one of the things, I mean, good on you for taking this. And yeah, it is truly needed, so go for it.
Especially from our own people.
Yes.
Awesome. We have about we only have about 10 minutes left. But with that, I mean, the Indigenous community, people put their lives and are committing their whole lives to music. And it's not just music. Like some people think that it's like, oh, it's music, but it's like, no, this is, people are committing their lives to it, their entire lives and their futures, their dreams, their wishes, their passions, their all their energies. And so with that, let's, we just have 2 minutes for each of you, just so some closing thoughts. Maybe we'll start with Elaine, work this way. So please try to keep it to 2 minutes.
Okay, this is going to be a commercial. Another one. I helped create a blues showcase through the Toronto Blues Society 25 years ago. And we're celebrating our 25th anniversary on Thursday, April 18th in downtown Toronto at the Lula Lounge. And we're going to have the best of our Indigenous blues musicians, Murray Porter, Pappy John's band, Digging Roots, among others, Derek Miller as well. And with all these blues musicians, 6 of them have won Junos in the Indigenous category. And we're going to bring them all together for one night only, Thursday, April 17th? No. What did I say? 16th, sorry. It's the day before my birthday. How could I forget? Anyway, yeah, if you can, please spread the word to your friends and peeps and T.O. who love the blues. If not, just come on down and see some great music.
Elaine Bomberry, thank you. Thank you so much for being here, Elaine. Jaaji.
Can you repeat the question?
Just 2 minutes. What final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Okay. So, thank you all. I'm going to use this 2 minutes to actually, I think they're all left, but people actually thought that we were going to come here and sing. So apologies to those of you that thought we were here to sing. Thank you for coming out though. This, you know what, this is what community is. You know, having a conversation about music, no matter where you come from. Bottom line, we're human. We all come from somewhere. Inuit means people. Anishinaabe means people.
We've been meant to feel like we're at home, and just so grateful for the connections we've gotten to make here and in the industry in general. But also, I know some of the community members left, but I really, truly am grateful to Inuit. Even though I don't come from there, I've always felt so much love from the communities, and community is so, so important. And so thank you for welcoming us into your communities, and just continue to do good work. You know, I think everything that I do in my life, I always hope to leave a positive footprint and that ripple effect. And you know, all the work that we're trying to do as artists right now, we realize that we may never see what's gonna happen in the future, but it's gonna be the change for our children. And you talked a little bit about sacrifices and artists putting everything on the line. Between Jaaji and I, we have 6 children, and music is our full-time job. And so we're away a lot. And it's really, really hard as a mother, as a father, to have to make those choices and make those sacrifices. But, you know, we hope that we're showing our children that they can believe in their dreams and do the things that make them the most happiest. Because really, we're only ever here once. So if we're not doing what drives us, what makes us feel alive every single day, then we need to find what that is and change it. Chimigwich.
Thank you, Chelsey. Alethea.
I just wanted, this will be the only time I can publicly say this, but the number of people from these lands that have told me that they've been praying for my country. I went out yesterday for all of half an hour and 4 Indigenous folks somehow found me and told me that. I just want to say thank you so much because our country is burning. It's one of an amazing Indigenous musician, Neil Morris, Dreaming Now, some of you may know, has a First Nations Fire Relief Fund because it's the First Nations community back home that are not going to be supported and helped. So I just wanted to publicly say thank you. I just want to say that the music industry is working exactly the way it was designed. It was designed to exclude certain groups of people over others because it was built on the system that colonialism has kind of created. And so it's really great to be around so many Indigenous brothers and sisters, and then there's other people of colour back home that are doing the work to ensure that our system of music is what's leading the way forward. So I just wanted to say thank you. And lastly, I only exist because of Indigenous musicians. Like my role is because of them, and I just want to promote Indigenous music. Please listen to Black Australia, Deadly Beats and Original Storytellers on Spotify. They are Indigenous Australian, curated by Indigenous people back home. And if you are non-Indigenous, we have a saying back home called pay the rent, and paying the rent can be quite simple. Buy Indigenous people's music, buy tickets to their concert, buy their merch. Often buy the merch these days gets more money back, so please pay the rent. If you're a settler, there are many ways you can pay the rent in the industry, so thank you.
Wow, thank you. Curtis.
Okay, I'm going to kind of use this as a commercial too. So Indigenous Resilience in Music, IRIM just launched our 3-part component program called Rhythm of the People. So we have an artist residency program that's going to be running from May 4th until the 17th of May at the National Music Center in the Studio Bell. And that's focused around language revitalization. So if you are an Indigenous artist, get in touch with us. Our applications are still open. And it's a full ride. We pay for everything. We get you there. We pay you to be there, which doesn't happen a lot in a lot of residency programs. So we really want the artists to get involved. So you can check that out at irim.ca. And then we also have youth programs that are going to be happening as well. But our Rhythm of the People Music and Arts Festival is happening from August 14th to the 15th. We have a huge lineup. We're really, really thankful for the opportunity to have our first ever Indigenous-led Music and Arts Festival in Mohkinstsis in Calgary. And hope you can come out if anyone here is keen to that. We have a lot of Indigenous musicians, a lot of non-Indigenous musicians. It's going to be pretty incredible. But yeah, Sugapi, thank you for everyone being here and inviting me here, to the organizers for bringing me here. I really appreciate it. Sugapi. Yan.
And just finally, we just want to honor those who came before, those artists. We want to honor our artists who are here today. And we certainly look forward and welcome those new artists that we're going to hear about, because they're coming. They're not going to stop. They're on their way. I've seen some of them already. So I'm just so excited to be in this time and in this place with everybody here, of course, too. So miigwech, everybody. Let's give it up for Manitoba Music for making this happen, and the sponsors. And we wish you a good evening. And if our guests are going to be here a bit longer, if you want to chat with them afterwards. So have a good night. I hope.